Sun folk say the plains are empty, but the wind carries secrets if you know how to listen. In the winter of '88, the wind howled with murder. One man rode straight into the teeth of a deadly blizzard, risking everything to pull a dying girl from the devil's grip. The sky above the Texas Panhandle wasn't just gray. It was a bruised, malignant purple, sagging under the weight of the coming storm. Wyatt Sullivan pulled the collar of his sheepskin coat tighter around his neck, his breath pluming in the freezing air. He was a man carved from the harsh landscape itself, lean, weathered, with eyes the color of chipped flint. He rode a massive dun gelding named Copper, a beast as stubborn and resilient as its master. Wyatt had been pushing hard for his homestead, a secluded spread he called the Ironwood, tucked against the breaks of the Canadian River. The barometer at Old Man Abernathy's general store in Tascosa had been dropping like a stone, and every seasoned cattleman knew what that meant. A blue norther was coming, the kind of blizzard that buried cattle standing up and froze men in their saddles. He was less than 5 miles from his warm hearth when Copper suddenly halted, tossing his head and flattening his ears. "Easy, boy," Wyatt murmured, pulling back on the reins. He squinted through the rapidly falling snow, the flakes already thick enough to blind a man. The dark shape marred the pristine expanse of white ahead. Wyatt spurred Copper forward, his hand instinctively dropping to the cold iron of the Colt .45 riding at his hip. As he drew closer, the shape resolved into a nightmare. It was the morning stagecoach bound for Amarillo, or rather, what was left of it. The carriage lay on its side, one wheel still spinning lazily in the howling wind. The team of horses was gone, their traces cut, but the passengers had not been so lucky. 3 bodies lay scattered in the snow, the crimson stains around them already freezing into dark ice. Wyatt dismounted, his boots crunching in the crusty snow. He checked the driver, first shot clean through the chest. A passenger lay near the door, an older gentleman clutching a valise that had been ripped open, its contents mostly papers and a few scattered silver dollars flapping in the wind. It was a robbery, but it was brutal and hurried. Wyatt's eyes scanned the perimeter. The killers had ridden south, their tracks already filling with fresh powder. But something else caught his eye. A different set of tracks. Smaller, stumbling. A passenger had escaped. Wyatt knelt, rushing the top layer of snow from the indentation. The footprint was delicate, made by a woman's riding boot. It pointed north, straight into the teeth of the approaching blizzard, toward the unforgiving Badlands. "Damn it," Wyatt hissed under his breath. Whoever she was walking into a frozen grave. The temperature was dropping by the minute. He looked south toward the safety of his cabin, and the roaring fire he knew he could build within an hour. Then he looked north, where the sky was turning a terrifying, impenetrable black. There was no choice, not for a man like Wyatt Sullivan. He swung back into the saddle. "Come on, Copper. We ain't going home just yet." He tracked her for 2 grueling hours. The wind grew from a moan to a deafening roar, whipping the snow into a blinding whiteout. Wyatt had to dismount and lead Copper by the reins, walking with his head bowed against the gale, his eyes trained on the ground to catch the faintest depressions in the snow before the wind erased them completely. The tracks grew erratic. She was staggering, crawling in places. Wyatt's heart pounded against his ribs, a heavy drumbeat of dread. He knew what freezing to death looked like. First came the shivering, then the exhaustion, and finally a treacherous, warming sleep from which a body never woke. He found her at the base of a jagged limestone outcropping. She had wedged herself beneath the overhang, a small, shivering bundle wrapped in a torn velvet traveling cloak. The snow had already begun to bury her, turning her into a nameless mound in the frozen wasteland. Wyatt dropped Copper's reins and fell to his knees beside her. He brushed the snow from her face. She was young, perhaps no more than 22, with skin as pale as the snow around her. Her lips were a terrifying shade of blue, her eyelashes caped with ice. "Miss," Wyatt shouted over the roaring wind, grabbing her shoulders. "Miss, you have to wake up." Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of a stormy sea. They were unfocused, glazed with the encroaching lethargy of severe hypothermia. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Wyatt didn't waste another second. He stripped off his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her, picking her up in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, frail and broken by the ordeal. "Hold on to me," he commanded, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. He hoisted her onto Copper's saddle, climbing up behind her and shielding her fragile body with his own. He spurred the horse, turning back toward the ironwood. The ride back was a descent into hell. The storm hit with its full, unbridled fury. The temperature plummeted to 30 below zero. Wyatt couldn't see past his horse's ears. He navigated by instinct, memory, and the grace of God alone. He kept talking to her, his voice a steady, grounding rumble against her ear. "Stay with me. Don't close your eyes. We're almost there. I've got a fire waiting. Just hold on." By the time the dark, sturdy outline of his log cabin emerged from the whiteout, Wyatt couldn't feel his hands or his feet. He practically fell from the saddle, dragging the girl down with him. He kicked the heavy oak door open and carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind them to block out the screaming storm. They were safe, but the fight for her life had just begun. The interior of the ironwood cabin was pitch black and bone-chillingly cold, but it blocked the deadly wind. Wyatt laid the unconscious woman on the heavy bearskin rug in front of the stone fireplace. His hands were clumsy, numb blocks of ice, but he forced them to work. He struck a match, the sudden flare illuminating the harsh lines of his exhausted face. Within minutes, he had a roaring fire blazing in the hearth, the dry mesquite wood crackling and spitting, throwing desperate heat into the frozen room. He turned his attention back to the woman. She had stopped shivering, a very bad sign. Her body had given up trying to warm itself. Wyatt knew what he had to do, propriety be damned. If he didn't get her out of her frozen, wet clothes, she would be dead before morning. His jaw set in a grim line. He unfastened his sheepskin coat, began to remove her garments. Her velvet cloak was stiff with ice. Beneath it, her woolen dress was soaked through from crawling in the snow. He worked quickly and respectfully, stripping her down to her white cotton chemise, which was thankfully dry. He wrapped her tightly in 3 heavy wool blankets from his own bed and dragged the mattress directly in front of the fire, laying her upon it. He filled the cast-iron kettle with snow, hung it over the fire, and then tended to Copper, bringing the loyal horse into the small attached lean-to and rubbing him down with coarse burlap. When Wyatt returned to the main room, the cabin was beginning to thaw. The woman's breathing was shallow but steady. Wyatt sat in a rocking chair beside the mattress, a mug of black coffee in his hands, watching her. For 2 days the blizzard raged outside, an unbroken wall of howling white. And for 2 days Wyatt fought a war against the fever that had taken hold of the girl. He spooned warm broth between her lips, placed cool, damp cloths on her forehead, and listened to her delirious mumblings. She spoke of blood, of running, of a man named Andrew. On the morning of the 3rd day, the wind finally died. A suffocating silence fell over the plains. Wyatt was chopping wood just outside the door when he heard a weak voice. Where am I?" He dropped the axe and stepped back inside. She was sitting up, clutching the wool blankets to her chest. The blue tinge had left her lips, replaced by a pale, fragile pink. Her sea-green eyes were clear now, though wide with fear. "You're at the Ironwood Ranch," Wyatt said softly, keeping his distance so as not to spook her. He removed his hat, revealing dark, unruly hair. "My name is Wyatt Sullivan. I found you out by the limestone breaks. You've been asleep for a spell." She stared at him, taking in his broad shoulders, his worn flannel shirt, the holster strapped to his thigh. Slowly the memories seemed to flood back. She squeezed her eyes shut, a tear escaping to track down her cheek. "The stagecoach," she whispered. "They killed Mr. Ridling. Henderson. They killed the driver." "I know," Wyatt said, pouring a cup of warm water from the kettle and bringing it to her. "Drink this slowly." She took it with trembling hands. "Thank you for saving my life, Mr. Sullivan. I am Adeline Preston." Wyatt nodded, settling back into his rocking chair. "Well, Miss Preston, I'm glad to see you among the living. You gave me quite a scare. Soon as the snow clears enough to ride, I'll take you into Tascosa. We'll wire your family, get the sheriff." "No!" Adeline gasped, spilling the water. She scrambled backward on the mattress. "No, you can't take me to the sheriff. And you absolutely cannot wire my family." Wyatt frowned, his instincts sharpening. "Miss Preston, 3 men are dead out on that trail. The law needs to know." Adeline shook her head, her breath catching in her throat. She looked terrified, not of the storm they had just survived, but of something far worse. "You don't understand," she said, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "It wasn't a random robbery. They weren't after the strongbox." "Then what were they after?" Adeline looked him dead in the eye. "Me." Wyatt sat forward, the wood of the rocking chair creaking in the quiet cabin. "Care to explain that?" She took a deep, shuddering breath. "My father is Horace Preston. He owns the Double Diamond spread down near Fort Worth. I was traveling to Colorado to escape." She swallowed hard. "I was engaged to be married to a man named Andrew Pendleton." Wyatt recognized the name. Pendleton was a wealthy, ruthless cattle baron expanding his territory aggressively into the Panhandle. Men who crossed Pendleton usually ended up disappearing. "I discovered something a week before the wedding," Adeline continued, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "Andrew isn't just buying up land. He's been hiring bushwhackers to run small ranches off their claims. If they don't sell, he has them killed. I found his ledger. I saw the names, the payouts. I took the ledger and ran." Wyatt's gaze hardened. "Where is the ledger now?" "In my valise," she said, her eyes widening in sudden horror. "The one they ripped open at the stagecoach." Wyatt remembered the older man clutching the torn bag, the papers scattering in the wind. "They didn't find it," he said slowly. "They were looking for it, but the storm hit fast. They cut the team loose and ran before they could tear the carriage apart completely. If Andrew's men realize I survived, if they realize the ledger's still out there." Adeline looked around the small, sturdy cabin, suddenly seeing it not as a sanctuary, but as a trap. "They will track me here. Andrew employs a tracker, a bounty hunter named Gideon Locke. He's half Apache and completely devoid of a soul. He won't stop until he finds me." Wyatt stared at the fire. The flames cast long, dancing shadows across the log walls. He had built this life to escape the violence of his past, a past he had buried deep in the dirt of southern Texas. He wanted nothing more than peace, his cattle, and the quiet of the plains. But looking at the desperate, beautiful woman shivering on his floor, he knew peace was no longer an option. The storm outside had broken, but a much deadlier storm was heading straight for his front door. "Locke is good," Wyatt finally said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "But he ain't God, and this is my land." He stood up, walking over to a heavy wooden chest at the foot of his bed. He threw open the lid and pulled out a Winchester repeating rifle, its barrel gleaming with fresh oil. "Rest up, Adeline," Wyatt said, racking the lever with a sharp, metallic clack that echoed through the room. "Because as soon as that snow hardens, the hounds are coming." The freeze that followed a Texas blue norther brought a strange, deceptive kind of peace to the place. The howling wind finally died away, leaving behind a sky of piercing, cloudless blue. The sun shone with a brilliant glare reflecting off the rolling ocean of white. Yet, the temperature remained brutally low, hovering near zero, and the deep drifts of snow had hardened overnight into a thick, crystalline crust of ice capable of supporting the weight of a horse. Wyatt Sullivan stood by the small window of his cabin, staring out at the blinding landscape. He knew this terrain, and he knew the hard crust meant travel was possible again. It meant the men hunting Adeline Preston were no longer trapped by the snow. He turned away from the window and began moving through the cabin with practiced, grim efficiency. He dragged heavy oak shutters over the glass, bolting them shut from the inside with thick iron crossbars. He left only a narrow 2-inch vertical slit in the front shutter, just wide enough to slide the long, octagonal barrel of his Winchester rifle through. Adeline sat by the roaring fire, wrapped in Wyatt's oversized woolen shirt and a thick woven Navajo blanket. The terrifying pallor had completely left her skin, replaced by a healthy, vibrant flush. Yet the haunting shadow of fear remained anchored in her sea-green eyes. She watched Wyatt work with a quiet intensity, her hands resting protectively on the torn leather valise that had cost 3 innocent people their lives. "You don't have to do this, Mr. Sullivan," Adeline said softly, the crackle of the hearth accentuating the quiet of the room. "If you give me a horse, I can ride north. I can draw them away from your home. You've saved me once. You owe me no further debt." Wyatt stopped sliding heavy shells into his rifle and looked at her. "Miss Preston out there on the ice, you wouldn't last a single night. And Gideon Locke isn't a man who gets drawn away. He tracks, he corners, and he kills. You leave this cabin, and you're handing Andrew Pendleton his ledger on a silver platter." Adeline traced the scarred leather of the bag. "Andrew will destroy the entire panhandle to keep these names a secret. There are judges in this ledger, sheriffs, men who looked the other way while good ranchers were burned out or shot in the back. That's exactly why we aren't running," Wyatt replied, his voice a low, steady rumble. He walked over to the wooden table, pulling a map of the territory from a drawer and spreading it flat. "Pendleton has local law in his pocket, sure, but he doesn't own the whole state. Down south, near the old Goodnight Loving Trail, there's a detachment of Texas Rangers stationed near Quanah. Captain Bill McDonald is leading them." Adeline looked up, a flicker of hope breaking through her dread. "Captain McDonald, the one they write about in the Dallas papers." "The very same," Wyatt nodded, tapping a finger on the map. "McDonald is a hard man, and a rigidly honest one. He can't be bought with Pendleton's bloody money. If we can survive the night and get this ledger to Captain McDonald, Andrew Pendleton will hang from a sturdy oak tree before the spring thaw." Adeline stared at the broad-shouldered cowboy. He was a stranger, yet he was risking his land, his sanctuary, and his life for her. "Why are you doing this, Wyatt? You could just look the other way." Most men would. Wyatt's jaw tightened. He looked away, his eyes catching the dancing flames in the hearth. "A long time ago, down in Monterey, I looked the other way when I shouldn't have. I was a younger man, wearing a badge I didn't fully respect. Good people died because I chose the easy path over the right one. I came up to the Ironwood to be left alone, to forget. But I promised myself I'd never look the other way again." He turned back to her, his flint-colored eyes softening just a fraction. "Besides, I don't much care for bullies." The afternoon bled into evening, the golden sun dipping below the frozen horizon and plunging the world back into a bitter, bone-chilling darkness. Wyatt extinguished the oil lamps, leaving only the dim, flickering orange glow of the fireplace to illuminate the room. He handed Adeline a loaded double-barreled shotgun, showing her how to brace the heavy stock against her shoulder. "Aim for the center of the mass and pull both triggers if they breach the door," he instructed, his tone purely professional, masking the rising tension in his chest. Silence settled over the ironwood cabin, heavy and suffocating. An hour passed, then 2. The only sounds were the popping of the mesquite wood and the ragged sound of their own breathing. Suddenly, from the lean-to attached to the side of the cabin, Copper let out a sharp, anxious whinny. The horse's hooves struck the dirt floor in a restless, panicked rhythm. Wyatt instantly dropped to one knee beside the barricaded window, sliding the Winchester barrel through the slit. The moonlight painted the snow in shades of ghostly silver. At first, the tree line at the edge of his property appeared completely still. Then, a shadow detached itself from the pines. A voice echoed across the frozen clearing, carrying easily on the thin, freezing air. It was smooth, calm, and utterly devoid of humanity. "Hello, the cabin," Gideon Locke called out. He stepped into the moonlight, a tall, imposing figure wrapped in a dark duster, holding a Sharps buffalo rifle resting lazily against his shoulder. "My name is Locke. I believe you have something that belongs to my employer, Mr. Pendleton. Send the girl and the bag out, friend, and you get to watch the sunrise." Wyatt didn't hesitate. He leveled the Winchester, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared, shattering the stillness of the night. The bullet kicked up a plume of icy snow just inches from Locke's boots. "That's my answer, Locke," Wyatt shouted through the gun smoke. "Step foot on my porch, and the next one takes your head off." Locke didn't flinch. He simply smiled, a flash of white teeth in the dark, and melted back into the shadows of the trees. "Have it your way, cowboy?" Locke's voice drifted back, chilling the blood in Adeline's veins. "Burn them out, boys." The siege began not with a roar, but with a terrifying hiss. From the darkness of the tree line, 3 flaming arrows arced high into the night sky, their tips wrapped in oil-soaked rags. They slammed into the thick log walls of the cabin, the flames eagerly licking at the dry, frozen timber. "They're trying to smoke us out," Adeline cried, coughing as a wisp of dark smoke began to curl beneath the roof beams. "It won't work. The logs are too thick and frozen solid," Wyatt yelled over the sudden eruption of gunfire. A volley of hot lead tore through the air, slamming into the heavy oak shutters and shattering the upper stones of the chimney. Dust and mortar rained down on them. Wyatt pumped the lever of his Winchester, firing blindly into the muzzle flashes in the tree line. He heard a sharp cry of pain, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting the icy crust. "One down. Keep away from the walls, Adeline," Wyatt commanded, reloading his rifle with lightning speed. For 20 minutes the deafening exchange of gunfire raged. The cabin filled with the acrid, choking stench of sulfur and burnt powder. Wyatt moved like a ghost in the dim firelight, shifting from the front window to the side, firing holes he had drilled into the logs years ago. He was a simple man. He was a simple man, a mechanic with etched into his home to absorb the onslaught. But Gideon Locke was not a man who relied purely on brute force. He was a hunter. While his 2 remaining men kept Wyatt pinned down with a relentless barrage at the front of the cabin, Locke had circled around the back, moving silently across the ice. He slipped into the lean-to, a long hunting knife gleaming in his hand. Copper reared up, kicking wildly, but Locke dodged the lethal hooves and pressed himself against the interior door that led directly into the cabin. Inside, Wyatt was focused on the tree line. "They're slowing down," he muttered, wiping sweat and soot from his brow. "They're running low on ammunition." At that exact moment, the heavy wooden door leading to the lean-to exploded inward. Locke didn't bother picking the lock. He had placed a small charge of black powder at the hinges. The concussive blast threw Wyatt off his feet, sending his Winchester clattering across the floorboards. Through the splintered ruin of the doorway stepped Gideon Locke. The tracker's eyes locked onto the leather valise resting on the table, and then shifted to Wyatt, who was scrambling to pull his Colt .45 from his holster. Locke lunged with terrifying speed, kicking the revolver out of Wyatt's hand. He tackled the rancher to the floor, driving his knee into Wyatt's chest. The tracker raised his hunting knife, aiming for a swift, lethal strike to the throat. Wyatt caught Locke's wrist with both hands, his muscles screaming under the strain as the razor-sharp blade inched closer to his neck. Locke was incredibly strong, driven by a cold, mechanical ruthlessness. "You die for nothing, dirt scratcher," Locke hissed, leaning his entire body weight onto the knife. Wyatt's arms trembled. His vision began to blur. He was losing the leverage. Suddenly, a deafening boom shook the very foundations of the cabin. The blast of the shotgun was so loud it momentarily deafened both men. A massive hole appeared in the floorboards, mere inches from Locke's leg, showering him in deadly wood splinters. Locke jerked his head up. Standing near the fireplace, her face pale but her hands remarkably steady, was Adeline. The heavy double-barreled shotgun was braced hard against her shoulder, the barrel smoking, aimed squarely at the tracker's chest. "Get off him," Adeline ordered, her voice cutting through the ringing silence like a whip. "Or the next one cuts you in half." Locke's eyes narrowed. He looked at the shotgun, then at the fierce, unyielding determination in the girl's eyes. For the first time all night, the tracker hesitated. That split second was all Wyatt needed. With a desperate, explosive surge of strength, Wyatt bucked his hips, throwing Locke off balance. He rode, scrambling to his feet, and drove a punishing right hook directly into Locke's jaw. The blow sounded like a cracking whip. Locke staggered backward, dropping the knife. He spun toward the ruined doorway, realizing the fight was lost. Before Wyatt could grab him, the tracker threw himself through the splintered frame, disappearing into the dark lean-to and out into the freezing night. Wyatt grabbed his Colt from the floor and rushed to the doorway, aiming into the dark. But Locke was gone, vanished into the howling expanse of the panhandle. Outside, the remaining gunfire abruptly ceased. The surviving hired guns, seeing their leader flee, had broken and run. Wyatt slowly lowered his gun. He leaned against the doorframe, his chest heaving, his body bruised and battered. The freezing night air rushed into the cabin, biting at his sweat-soaked skin. He turned to look at Adeline. She slowly lowered the heavy shotgun, her hands finally beginning to shake as the adrenaline drained from her system. She looked at the ruined door, the bullet-riddled walls, and then at Wyatt. Wyatt walked over to her, gently taking the shotgun from her trembling hands and setting it on the table. He reached out, his rough, calloused fingers carefully wiping a smudge of gunpowder from her cheek. "You did good, Adeline," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You did real good." She collapsed against his chest, burying her face in his shirt. Wyatt wrapped his strong arms around her, holding her tight, anchoring her to the present. In the ruins of his battered cabin, surrounded by the remnants of a deadly siege, Wyatt realized that the quiet, isolated life he had built was over. And as he held Adeline Preston, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his own, he knew he wouldn't trade this moment for all the peace in the world. By the time the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the snowfields in brilliant shades of pink and gold, Wyatt had saddled Copper and a sturdy roan mare he kept in the corral. They packed the ledger securely in Wyatt's saddlebags, alongside enough provisions to make the hard ride south to Quanah. They stood together on the porch, looking out over the pristine, untouched snow that covered the tracks of the night's violence. The storm had passed, the walls had been beaten back. Wyatt offered his hand to Adeline, a silent promise of protection, of partnership, and of a future waiting to be written. She took it firmly, a warm, bright smile breaking across her face, melting the last of the winter frost. Together they rode out toward the rising sun, ready to bring the devil his due, and to finally find their way home. Did Wyatt and Adeline's fight for survival keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved this tale of frontier justice, romance, and untamed courage, hit the like button and share it with all your friends. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life Wild West stories delivered straight to your screen. Saddle up with us today and leave us a comment below.